Hi, welcome back everyone to another episode with Peter Engel and myself, Mihail Giu, exploring important concepts, theories of the fourth way system, as well as integrating them with a larger non-dual perspective. And so this is part of a larger playlist. You can see here the playlist, Reigniting the Fragments of the Fourth Way. And today we are going to tackle something that somehow is very dear to me. And it is from Gurdjieff in his masterpiece, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. There are some important teaching. It's just like half a page that seems very important, and also it's a little mysterious and esoteric, at least part of it. So I'm talking about what's called the, let's see, to say them right, the 5 Being-Obligolnian-Strivings. The 5 Being-Obligolnian-Strivings. Gurdjieff was inventing certain words or using different words from different languages. I'm not sure what Obligolnian means, but it links to semantically to the obligatory. It links a little bit to this idea of obligatory strivings. So a little bit of a brief context. So that chapter, those 5 being strivings, are from a chapter where Beelzebub, or Gurdjieff through Beelzebub, this wise alien being that has been observing humanity for thousands and thousands of years and being really dumbfounded by how the human beings are living so unconsciously and creating so much suffering for themselves, and somehow they lost their way. And part of his task was part of Beelzebub's task was to observe these peculiar beings, us, the humans, from above some observatory. And then sometimes he was so curious that he will just go there. He will descend on the planet. And apparently he had a humanoid body. So he can, although he had a tail, he had a big tail, but he could kind of hide the tail, put it in his pants in a certain way, and he would avoid going to the doctor or to saunas, not to be busted for being an alien. But otherwise he will blend in with the population, and he had different sojourns, I believe 6 of them, I may be wrong, all throughout the history of humanity, from antiquity, ancient antiquity, up to 20th century Russia, France, United States, where he was just observing what's happening there and trying to understand. And then the whole book is some kind of impartial criticism of a life of man, as if talking to his grandson, Hussein, I believe, who was very curious, and asked him, "Grandpa, tell me more about those peculiar beings and all of that." So apparently, so these 5 being strivings that we're going to talk about, apparently according to Gurdjieff, from time to time, our common father, or the creator, the maker, sensing or knowing how much suffering and how much going against the law, against the law, the humans are, against the divine law, the humans are living, they will periodically send certain messengers of God, some kind of highly developed beings that will take the form of a human being and bring some teaching. And Gurdjieff mentions several of them, like Jesus and Buddha and many others. He talks highly of the Tibetan tradition and various Tibetan masters and lamas. And anyway, and then he mentions about this sage, which we don't know if actually it existed or not, but it's irrelevant. Ashiata Shiemash. Ashiata Shiemash. So these 5 strivings were the teaching of Ashiata Shiemash. And what was important about this sage that lived long time ago, or might have never existed, it doesn't matter, is that during his time was the only time, according to Gurdjieff, that under his influence he really impacted so many people, and he developed many initiates and other highly developed students that reached a high level of being. And there was so much higher level of consciousness at his time that almost for the whole humanity there were periods of peace, and almost everybody, or at least in the continent of Asia, everybody was now living a conscious life, and the whole society and the whole political system, the whole government was aligned with like a higher spiritual teaching, evolutionary teaching. And so Gurdjieff was saying that this lasted for a few hundred years until humans, again, through their peculiar process of reciprocal destruction, war, they just wiped out all the teaching and wiped each other out, and then the teaching was lost. And so apparently the cornerstone of Ashiata Shiemash teaching, or what was the law, or what we know more recently as the commandments, for Judeo-Christian thing, the Judeo-Christian tradition. So apparently these 5 strivings, they were inscribed, and everybody was trying to live according to them. And we are going to go into them. But when I read them and tried to contemplate on them, I was struck in a sense that what was meaningful to me is that it's almost like they represent the manual of living, like a manual of living a conscious life, purposeful life, not wasting one's life. And I often pondered on how it's so mysterious here. We come here and as consciousness, and then there's the body, we have this vehicle of the body, and then very soon somehow, or seemingly, we are wiped out. We have no memory of what happened before, and we have no idea why we are here, and then we are programmed by our condition, by society and parents and cultural trends and all of that, and we start following certain pursuits, of which very often are meaningless and wasting life from the point of view of a conscious evolution. And somehow I felt like it's almost unfair and tricky. We come here to evolve, but then we are clean slate. We forget everything, and we don't know why we are here, what we are, and what's the point of life. So what was emotional for me is that Gurdjieff almost, to me, gave this like the recipe to not waste one's life. So that's why I would almost call them principles of conscious living. These five being strivings. So that's what we are going to explore today. Any thoughts here, Peter? Before we go into them?
No, as you and I have talked about, you are more familiar with this. I have seen it, I've read through it. I'm not as intimately familiar with Beelzebub's tales as you are. I have read it, but you've read it numerous times and or listened to it numerous times, and you have more of a in-depth comprehension, I guess, of the whole book. And so I'm here I'm interested to hear what you're going to say about this, and then I'll contribute as I can.
Thank you. Okay. So first of all, what is interesting to me is that it doesn't say the 5 strivings, or hey, these are 5 things to do. They say the 5 being strivings. So this already, to me, it doesn't talk about behavior. It's not about how to be a good man, how to be a loving man, how to follow some morality, how to follow some trend. It's about the strivings of our being, of our spirit. That to me, that is important. And the first striving. The first striving, basically, that was what was recommended to all humanity. That's the way to live, and that's how apparently they were living in the time of Ashiata, Shiemash. First striving is to have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for their planetary body. To have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for their planetary body. I love this term, planetary body. It's the body that our being needs to operate on this planet. So to me, this is pretty straightforward. And I don't pretend to know what really Gurdjieff meant, and this is our contemplation. So to me here, this implies somehow it's first striving is also to really survive, to live. We've been given this chance and have this body is to live, even if life is hard, even if we are sad, even if we are totally depressed, or we may have periods of despair and suicidal. It's important to stay in the game. It's a duty and a responsibility to live, to stay alive, and that is meaningful to me because I work as a psychotherapist, and I know for some people it's so hard emotionally, and various things happen, and somehow not enough teaching how to handle the suffering, and there's this idea of checking out. There's this idea of relief. I can just kill myself and all this suffering will be over. And I don't know if that's true. I mean, it's a little bit beyond my pay grade to know what happens after this body ends, but from my most trusted sources, apparently it doesn't work like that. It works like that, let's say, if I'm in emotional, psychological suffering, that then I can't handle it anymore, and I choose to end my life, not to suffer psychologically and emotionally. I'm not talking here about, let's say, intense physical pain, torturous pain, degenerating diseases. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about psychological, emotional, inner turmoil, inner hell. The assumption of those people is that, well, if I kill myself, then it's over and I'll be at peace. But what, as I said, from my sources and intuitively, the idea is that if one does that, of course, it's not one is going to go to hell or that one will be punished. I really don't resonate with that at all, and it seems to be a man-made idea. But it's that although one will be met with compassion and understanding, it's almost like, hey, you got stuck in the game. It's like a video game. You got stuck, and okay, you bounced out, take a rest, come back again. You're going to go through the whole thing again, the very same thing again, to face it until you can move to the next level. I have experienced this in my life, in this life, repeating situation after situation after situation over and over and over until kind of became wiser, and then things moved on. So I don't think it's, I mean, I'm putting here in the first striving, I'm sensing this idea of staying alive and surviving as a duty to our Father or Source. But then there's the other element here, to have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for the planetary body. So I believe, and Peter, you can talk about this, but our instinctive center is doing that anyway, is designed to do that. A healthy instinctive center is designed to keep the body alive and to have food, shelter, water, some degree of comfort and safety and whatever we need. However, I think in our modern age, and I think it's a weakness of humanity, is that we forgot why we are here, and then we are going for having more comforts. And he talks about what's really necessary, what's satisfying and necessary for the planetary body. Yeah, but that's not the ultimate aim. And I think a lot of the humanity goes for just being slave to one's desire to keep adding more and more toys and various embellishment and bigger this and larger that and fancier this, which is really not necessary. So the word necessary is important. And also this idea that it is important to have some level of stability here. Stability, foundation of stability even in Maslow's pyramid of values. It's hard to go into the deep spiritual work if we are on the street, or if we are in a warfare, or if we are really hungry. It's really hard. It's not impossible. There are cases like that, but yeah, that will be some of my thoughts on the first striving. Anything is evoked in you, Peter, on this?
I was looking at these not so much as guidelines for humanity in general, but as guidelines, a framework for thinking about what is required for someone who's interested in waking up.
Mm.
And so I caught my attention with the same words, satisfying and necessary. And I equate this, of course, because of my familiarity with the fourth way, I equate this with the idea of being what is called a good householder, meaning to have the time and the energy for this internal work, this internal striving for conscious awareness, that you have to have your life in fairly good order. So you have to have a necessary means of supporting yourself. You have to have a necessary balance in your life and that kind of thing. At the same time, this word satisfying, to me, what came to mind is essence, that one's essence also needs to be kind of healthy. And it needs to be being nourished enough, not necessarily completely, not having this wonderful, blissful essence of life, but your essence is being fed. It's not being defeated. So it's able, because essence is the seed for the seed of awareness in us. It's the seed case, rather. It's how the fourth way presents it. And so we need to have a kind of a stable life in terms of having the time and the energy to be able to devote ourselves to more serious inner work. And then our essence, this inner part of us that's more true, more simple, more our real nature, has to be in good condition and be kept well nourished, is the word that comes to mind. So that's how I was thinking of these. Again, that this isn't just for humanity in general, but for people interested in internal evolution, enlightenment, spiritual work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like how you put it like that. Yeah. It reminds me of, one of my teachers, Francis, would say this thing like that the Consciousness is the owner and manager and operator of this body. And we need to be a good owner, a good manager. So that's part of a good householder, which is a term in the fourth way: being responsible, being wise, not being too loose, not being tramp or lunatic. And yeah, so to ensure not just the decent, I mean healthy food if possible, because what we put inside, what kind of gas we put in the car will determine a lot the performance of the car. If we eat all this toxicity that is pervasive these days and eat food that is full of chemicals or full of suffering, it is going to impact our psychic, and it is going to impact our ability to go. So some intentionality around food. Also about we are mammalians. So we are mammalians, and most mammals are pack animals. So some kind of basic emotional needs, some kind of friends, meaningful friendship, connections. I mean, for us in the work, it's like second line, meaningful connections in the work, where we are other human beings interested in the work, but we hang out, we are enjoying ourselves. That's important. And I know people that are interested in conscious evolution, but for some various reason they are very isolated, and it's a big suffering in that. It's a big suffering, and I think that's part of the work to somehow see how come they ended up there and to come out of that. Also intellectual, so intellectual, emotional, our essence encompasses all the centers. Well, let's go on, because we are staying a lot with the first one, which is the simplest one. The second striving. The second striving is to have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. To have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. Wow. I feel like deep emotion, and I can see how Gurdjieff embodied that. And if you watch, read his books and the movie Search of Meetings with Remarkable Man. Also Uspensky, his student, and many of his students, and Rodney Collin, they were having this constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. So to me, this is about like, hey, here, now that the body has what it needs and is overall stable and comfortable, now do what you came here to do, to wake up, go through the process, various stages of conscious evolution. And it's important here again, it doesn't say self-improvement, constant and flagging instinctive need. The word self-perfection may allude to what in New Age days is self-improvement and becoming a more better person, a better ego, a better, more developed, more polished, more healed ego. But according to the fourth way, according to Gurdjieff, and basically as we come here and as we become adults, man is an infinite being. Basically, it's like an acorn as compared to an oak tree. So we have this choice to remain as we are, like unfinished. Like we have a house of 4 stories and we only live in the basement. So the perfecting from self-perfecting from the point of view of being is to wake up more and more, become more conscious, die a lot of false stuff, to die our pettiness, our vanity, our arrogance, our self-pity, our reactivity, our enslaved to other people's opinion, our being distracted. All of this, a lot needs to die. Some false imaginary self needs to die. So become more conscious, die, in order for something to be reborn. So, and also I like this, the unflagging instinctive need, constant unflagging instinctive need. And I like how he puts the word instinctive, because usually the word instinctive is associated with the instinctive center. But I do sense that for those of us who are more, I'm not sure, lucky, or I'm not sure what are the criteria, but as a 15-year-old, I don't know, I found a book on spirituality and I recognized, like, whoa, it was, I don't know, it was some Swami Shivananda or then Osho before I got to the fourth way. And something in me recognized that this is very important. And there was an instinctive going towards them. It was important, although being like a young man and full of falseness and full of, mistakes and full of shit, basically.
I see too that word instinctive, meaning in the sense of deeply ingrained. And again, what I read into this from the fourth way perspective is the idea of a magnetic center. And I see that these strivings, now that we're talking about it, I'm seeing they build one on top of the next. Each one builds on the ones below it. And so you have to have a stable kind of existence. You have to have time and money and the right energy in order to be able to have this ingrained desire that draws you, it pulls you toward more and more often with more and more intensity toward this idea of enlightenment, awakening, self-perfection, which is what to me, that's what that term implies. Doesn't mean like you said, not that we're becoming more perfect, but this true self-perfection. And that a healthy, stable, committed, desirous, for lack of a better word, magnetic center, that part in us that is drawn, because there are many parts of our being that are not. Many parts of our being are drawn just to ordinary existence, survival, reputation, fame, all these things, possessions, and so on. And so also what this is saying is it doesn't mean a magnetic center is not one thing. There are many different kinds and different degrees of magnetic center. It means you can have a passing interest in spiritual ideas, and that's not enough. What he's saying, it has to be constant and unflagging. You have to be really wanting and be ready to be committed to, where in such a way that your interest in your pursuit of self-perfection, of which is awakening, has to become more and more and more the priority. Or it doesn't have to. It will become, if according to his description, it's in those in whom it becomes more and more a priority in their life, that they now are actualizing, living these first two strivings. And again, with the second one building on the first is the foundation. The second is something that's able to now build itself and increase itself on top of that foundation of the first striving. So that's how I see it, just in terms of what the fourth way calls having a magnetic center, but a healthy and ever blooming, ever blossoming magnetic center.
Yes. Yes, I like how you're seeing it. Also, this reminds me a little bit, the Christian, early Christian, this idea of conversion, right? Actually, it is not like, oh, it is not taken in that religious mechanical way, but it's more like all my energies are now going towards that. It's a lasering on the aim, constant unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. And I'm sure that Peter, and some of the people listening to this, and they are starting to sense this, like, if I'm not engaged in conscious work somehow, if I'm getting distracted for some time, something feels off. There's something not right. That's a good sign. It's hard to keep sleeping. I think it's a turning point when sleeping, being spiritually asleep and living a mechanical life, it starts to be painful. It starts to be disturbing, and something that reminds us, something else reminds us and drives us. Somehow that's already a very good point.
And it's interesting he put in this word need.
Yeah,
So it's like that. It's not even that it's more and more of a desire. It's more and more of a need. It's a fundamental need in your being
yes.
to pursue self-perfection in the inner sense.
That is interesting, because this reminds me, my current teacher I work with, Satyama, she says this: that's basically the deepest need is the need of God, of conscious realization of God. That is the deepest need. And then he was saying to some people, but it applies to me, to many of us, he says, hey, don't be casual with God. Don't be casual. It's always like casual sex or casual. It has to be a committed, serious relationship. Because otherwise, it's going to happen like what Gurdjieff is saying. And I'm just telling the people in my group the other day, I was telling them, guys and girls, this is powerful teaching. You guys have found this. This is powerful, favorable conditions. You are doing the work. You need to really get more and more serious, because otherwise one is straddling, one is between two chairs, as Gurdjieff would say. If we are casual with it, we are straddling two chairs, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Let's go to the third striving. The third striving, which is interesting, as this builds on top of the other. So we have now the constant need for working on oneself, and the third one comes. The third striving is the conscious striving to know ever more and more concerning the laws of world creation and world maintenance. So the conscious striving to know even more and more concerning the laws of world creation and world maintenance. Here I haven't spent a lot of time contemplating on that, but to me this alludes to, just in the fourth way, it's important to combine the study of cosmology, the study of psychology, the inner world, with the study of cosmology, seeming the outer world, and the Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below. So somehow, in order to be going forward on the path in a good way, to understand the laws, to try to understand or discover some of the laws, the divine laws operating here. And I'm not talking about just, gravity or centrifugal force and all of that, which are also divine laws at the level of the cosmos, but we can talk about the law of three, the fourth way, the three forces, combining in everything that's happening, making it happen. So the law of three, the law of seven, the octaves, and as well as I feel this thing with the law of attraction has been really diluted a lot, and has become kind of used by the ego. But however, there is something true, something big time true in a way that whatever I'm churning on, whatever beliefs or feelings or whatever attitude I have towards other people or towards myself, whatever subconscious attitudes we have, whatever our psychology is subconsciously telling us, or even consciously, with the self-pity, self-deprecation is not fair, being upset, negativity, all of that, that comes from some kind of being asleep and tortured, and that creates some kind of goggles, and then I'm going to see the world through those goggles. So who I am at this level creates some kind of frequency, and that is going to attract more of that. The more I'm focusing on how terrible what's happening in the political arena and how terrible this is, this or that, I'm going to see more and more of that. The more I'm focusing, basically what we give our energy to, that grows. So I feel that's also very much a law. So the conscious striving to know ever more and more concerning the laws of world creation, world maintenance. Also this, now going towards non-duality, these teachings about non-duality. It's everything, the computer, my body, my thoughts, my feelings, the mountain, are all modulations of the same reality. This is important knowledge to first get it intellectually, contemplate on it intellectually, and then through becoming more conscious and purifying oneself from the false, it will be revealed more intuitively, or in our experience, the truth of these laws.
Yes, I resonated with what you said in the beginning, the law, these higher laws, these laws of the universe, the law of seven, the law of three in particular, and this idea of as above, so below. It's not enough just to study ourselves, but to turn outward, to look outward, and to study how things are actually operating according to universal laws. It's interesting, it's interesting, creation and maintenance. And I hadn't really thought about it like that before, but you could almost say the law of three is about the creation of things, everything that happens, everything that manifests, according to the fourth way. And you see this in Eastern teachings too. They talk about the three forces, that there's this combination of three forces is behind everything. Nothing can exist without three forces coming into play. And that's how things are, you could say, created. And then how do they continue? How do they move? How do they change and all that? And that's this, how are they maintained? Are they kept going? And that really is the law of seven in many ways. And so to me, this is Gurdjieff in veiled language, referencing these higher laws, and this idea of, he would say, man can learn about himself by studying the universe, and he can learn about the universe by studying himself, because the laws are the same. They just operate differently on different scales, or as in different worlds. And it's interesting. The word that word is here, world, and it could even be more and more concerning the laws of worlds creation and worlds maintenance inside of us and outside of us.
And this is more new for listeners. In the playlist below, we have, I believe, a few videos on the cosmology and the law of three, law of seven. So you can totally look into that. Yeah, for those of us who got deeper into Beelzebub's tales, there's an interesting hierarchical, there is the God, the absolute, the infinite, and then there are like archangels or various angels and cherubs, but they're not like in this Renaissance kind of being sweet and chubby and kind of loving types. They had jobs to do. They were helping the common father, and they were this. Gurdjieff was talking about. There is this various archangel who was an architect or a world maintainer, world creator. So basically, it's like a big I don't want to say corporation because there's a bad connotation, but it's like a big company. It's a big organization, and the more advanced beings, they are helpful. They are helping the father in its purposes, you know. Also another idea is that in the fourth way, this idea there are 7 cosmoses within each other. So that is an important knowledge that can really expand our ego mind, and it's really important. Like, and here Advaita Vedanta or Advaita helps with that, combining with the knowledge of the 7 cosmoses. And so this body, from one angle, is a cosmos in itself, so the microcosmos. And then at the level of the body, the same laws operate everywhere. So just understanding how every cell, the cell in my lungs, the cell in my brain, and all of this, they are working perfectly in harmony, and they're all part of a body. The same way, all us humans and are all kind of cells in a body of humanity, and they are part of a bigger body. Although we don't see that, we feel like we are separate, and this guy's there, and like, you know, I'm me, and they are them. But you can totally see how at the level of the cell, it's not a separate cell. I mean, it's a conceptualization. It's a whole happening. It's a happening, basically. And so understanding or contemplating on these 7 levels of the universe helps. And, you know, God created in the Bible, they say God, and Gurdjieff quotes that, God created man in his image. Therefore, man is a miniature God. But this is the man, the man that's going to go through perfecting oneself from the point of view of being. That's what Gurdjieff was saying. Then you can, if one finishes oneself and fulfills this divine potential, then one can call oneself true a man, not a man in quotation marks. That's what Gurdjieff was saying. And the last piece on that is that I was recommending actually to people in my group to watch some of these Cosmos videos. You know, there are all of these documentaries and amazing TV series on the nature of the universe and the cosmos and the solar system. You know, rather than watching all the time silly stuff, just entertainment, just be exposed to that information. It really is like, whoa, it opens the scale and relativity. It opens the mind from such a small vista. You know, that's important part of first line, I would say. And
It's interesting you say that. The image that came to my mind as you said it, imagine a cell in our body watching a documentary about our body and trying to understand its place in that. Yes. On a very small TV set.
all right, so the fourth striving, which was the most kind of esoteric in some way and kind of bewildering for me, the fourth striving, the striving from the beginning of their existence to pay for their arising and their individuality as quickly as possible, in order afterwards to be free to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. So the striving for human beings, from the very beginning of their existence, to pay for their arising and their individuality as quickly as possible, to pay our debt here. There's some debt that Gurdjieff alludes to or something, to pay back, pay our debt, to pay for their arising and their individuality as quickly as possible, in order afterwards to be free to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. So here the first part, how I take it, is that, I mean, it's a lot of investment for this thing to be here. It's a lot of investment. A lot of investment has been put into this body, mind, consciousness to arise on this planet. And what does it mean to pay for the gift of life? To pay for the gift of life and for having gotten this seeming individuality, this seeming. So the way I look at it, the only way to, and also in order to lighten, so to do this, because only then one can lighten the sorrow of our common Father. And somewhere else I heard this, and to be helpful to God, basically to lighten the sorrow, to be helpful to our common Father. And so to me, the only way to, let's put this lighten the sorrow aside, because that's really esoteric, we'll get into it. But to be helpful, one cannot be helpful to anybody, including oneself, if one is unconscious. If one is asleep, lost in identification all day, every day, and churning on painful illusions and creating suffering for oneself and suffering for others, and the normal state of humanity. You see what's happening right now in America, everywhere. So one cannot be helpful to anybody, and if one is unconscious. So the way to be helpful and the way to pay for the gift of life is to do the second striving, basically. To have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being, to work on oneself and forgo through various stages of consciousness, spiritual evolution. That's how I look at it. And then, as quickly as possible, it's very interesting, don't waste time, don't fuck around, don't waste time, use time well. It's so short, our life here. And then, okay, in order to afterwards, because, basically Gurdjieff was saying in Beelzebub that only a man who has attained this level of self-awareness and even objective consciousness, then they can be useful in the bigger picture. So one can be useful in the company of our maker, of our true father and mother. Otherwise we are lost children creating havoc in the family, not realizing we are part of a family here. So now this part with, in order to be free, in order afterwards to be free, to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. I see now that, if I are wrapped up in our own unconsciousness, first of all, we are not free. We are not available. We are not available. We are tortured. We are unnecessary suffering and all of that. And so, okay, this is mysterious. So to lighten the sorrow of God. Wow. So the way I contemplate on this quite a bit, and here we need to look at God not as some old Jew with a big beard with a comb in his pocket, as Gurdjieff would say. That's not the out there, some God out there. Actually, Gurdjieff saying that one that needs to be killed, that imaginary God that needs to be destroyed. So we are talking now about, so what's the sorrow of our Father, sorrow of God? And my best contemplation on that was this. If God is the totality, it's the conscious totality. You know, just like in this body, there are all of these tissues and organs and cells and neurons and electrons, but they are all part of a conscious totality, conscious soup. In the same way, all the planets, all the dimensions, all the galaxies, seen and unseen, they are part of a bigger reality. That's and the totality of it, that is the reality, the body of God. And consciousness, God, consciousness is aware of everything. Yeah? So, and think about our planet here. Basically, people are unconscious. As miniature God, they're unconscious, and they are suffering tremendously. And they are creating suffering to each other through killing each other, through rejecting each other, cutting each other off, judging each other, torturing each other in big ways or in subtle ways. And God, reality consciousness, is feeling all of this. So can you imagine, actually we talked last time that Hawkins felt the totality, David Hawkins, the totality of the suffering of all humanity, and it was so, oh my God, atrocious that he became atheistic. But so that's the suffer, that's the sorrow of our common Father, almost seeing how all of its children that are still him, they are hurting each other so much, and the universal consciousness feels it all. So then the role as a more conscious beings is, first of all, we lighten our own sorrow here. We diminish the suffering. And then for just being on the planet, we are helpful. We are helpful to help others somehow change and live more in accordance to the fact that there are no others. And that's what Jesus would say, do unto others how it will be done unto you, and love thy neighbor as yourself. Yeah, so that will be living according to the law. So maybe I'll pass it to you, Peter. I think I spoke enough here.
I was starting to read this backwards from the point of view of, well, first of all, this is the big question, not the big question, one of the most interesting questions. What is this sorrow of this absolute consciousness, and how can we lighten it? But in order to be able to do that, we have to be free, he is saying, as you pointed out. So what does that mean, to be free? That means consciousness is now free from the mind. Consciousness is now free from the body and free from the mind, and with any and all preoccupation and or identification with them. It's now free, and in being free, it can lighten this, whatever this sorrow is, which we can talk more about. But in order to be free, a payment has to happen. And a payment is nothing more than a form of exchange. In the simplest terms, you exchange one thing for another, and then you receive something in exchange for something else. And in the fourth way, of course, the principle is there are two forms of payment, two forms of exchange. One is you sacrifice, you exchange your imaginary suffering, which is based on your imaginary idea of yourself, which is most of our suffering that torments us daily. Of course, there are people who are suffering extremely in real ways daily, but in general, humanity suffers from a lot of unnecessary suffering due to the ego. And so by sacrificing this, and in turn sacrificing the ego, now there is room for this seed case of essence and possibility of awakening, which is referred to in the first several strivings, to now be liberated. The other form of payment is through real suffering, enduring real suffering and transforming it and understanding what that means. Because what it means is that we don't transform the real suffering in our lives. Consciousness is transformed by transcending the suffering, by not identifying with, not clinging to the suffering and the feeling of I, who is suffering. And so, and to strive from the beginning of their existence, to me, this almost feels like existence is being used in a kind of a tricky way here, meaning once you begin to realize your existence, because we don't as a little baby and into teenagehood and sometimes into young adulthood and sometimes even later, a person may not realize their own existence, this incredible phenomenon. Made in man, made in the image of God. We have this possibility. And it's because we're here in this form, in this seed case, this container that has this potential for awareness to realize itself through. From the moment you start to realize that, to understand now this exchange has to start happening for it to be actualized. And this means in the fourth way, of course, it's sacrificing your imagination, your identification, your inner considering, lying, talking, the expression of negative emotion, all these things. These are forms of sacrifice. They're forms of payment. They are forms of exchange. We're exchanging the lower for the higher. We're giving up lower worlds. And it's interesting. This follows this idea of understanding how the worlds operate in us. And then the result, of course, is this lightening. So, but first we're free. Yes, consciousness is now free. And the image came to me a little while ago when you were talking, Mihai. Imagine this absolute consciousness. And imagine it as light, as the source of all light in the entire universe, what the fourth way calls the ray of creation. And imagine it now somehow manifests a proliferation of light bulbs throughout the universe. And they all have the possibility of lighting, but it's only a possibility. And so this awareness watches all of these light bulbs go out from itself, from its source, with this potential. What is it most concerned about? And what would lighten its sorrow? Sorrow was such an interesting word here to me, because it's not suffering. I don't believe, I can't say to you this is absolutely true, but I don't believe that this absolute source is suffering in the sense that we think of suffering. But sorrow I can actually relate to more easily. And yes, it has sent out these seeds, these light bulbs in my analogy, in the kind of the hope and the possibility they will light. They will turn on and they will begin to generate light, and it will be the same light at the source. And so imagine you're this absolute, it's kind of like, well, no, never mind. You're this absolute source, and you see, it's like the body seeing one of the cells watch on a very small TV, a documentary about its existence inside the body. And now you see this light bulb turn on. You see one of the many light bulbs start to glow. First it turns on, and maybe it flickers, and then it turns on, it stays on, and then it starts to glow. And now it's light is the thing. It's not the light bulb. It's the light that it's generating that lightens the sorrow of this absolute consciousness. And in this sense, Mihai, I was thinking about this, that an argument could be made that this absolute, this common father is not even concerned about our suffering. That in the end, the suffering we experience in the human form it's just as Uspensky said, it's just a fermentation. There's nothing personal about it. This God is not doing anything to anyone for any reason. It's not a personal thing. Our whole sense of personal is it is an illusion. It's a projection in the mind. And the suffering doesn't matter. This is what's also, it doesn't matter what kind, how you suffer, the form of suffering, the length of suffering, the kind of, it doesn't matter. It's just the grist for the mill. And the intention is, the hope is, it seems to me, of the common Father, is that it will yield more consciousness. And it will yield, it will be a catalyst for the transformation of consciousness, for more light bulbs to turn on. And this idea that Christ, came onto the earth to relieve our suffering, to me, this is so misunderstood. And it's in this context that I'm speaking that it's misunderstood. This common Father, this one source of unified consciousness in the universe, and we don't even understand what the universe is and how vast it is and what all the things going on in the universe, but its joy is consciousness. And you can know this because in yourself, and this goes back to this unflagging need, the more it moves in the direction of its source, the more joy, you could call it, it experiences simply from the consciousness of itself being conscious. And it's not human joy, although it can infiltrate into and affect human joy by lightening all the unnecessary suffering. But there's so much packed into this one. Striving from the beginning, paying, arising, and this individuality. Now this light bulb is recognizing itself. It's not individuality in the sense of me, personal, but now this light bulb is turning on and then starting to glow, generate light, and that lightens. Somehow, to me, it's almost like I could see the image comes to my mind of this absolute consciousness is weighed by having to carry all the light. And now suddenly some of these light bulbs are starting to bear that load. They're bearing the load of the light. They're sharing the generative power of the light. And this is light, literally lighting up and lightening this common Father. And, I'll just finish by saying it reminds me of, yes, it's the book, The Cloud of Unknowing by the anonymous English monk. And if in that book, there's another book called, it's called the Book of Privy Instruction to something. I can't remember now. But in that book, they're talking about prayer and what does it mean to pray? And the ultimate idea of prayer, which is praying to this common Father, is not asking for anything. It is rendering reverent affection for God as He is. That's it. That's the ultimate prayer. Rendering reverent affection for God as He is. Don't give me anything. Help me, save me, comfort me. No, it's not about me. And it's akin to a tree producing its best fruit and then holding up this piece of fruit to God and offering it. It's again an exchange. It's like a sacrifice, a yielding and offering to God my best, highest, purest fruit, which in the case of a human being is consciousness. And now, in effect, what this is this is the consciousness in us offering itself, giving itself back to its source. And this is, we're sacrificing. This is like a sacrifice. And it's interesting to me, one of the last words purported by Christ on the cross was, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit." And what's that saying is this human being, this consciousness, this was saying, this consciousness in me doesn't even belong to me. I'm now entrusting, I'm commending it to you. giving it back. This is a very high, profound, deep understanding about what consciousness is, what awakening means, where it goes, where it leads to. We're not just awakening for our own sake, to be more present to our life. Although that's it, that's obviously a part of it, but there's more. Where's this all going? It's this reunion, rejoining with the source. And to me, a lot of this is implied here in this fourth striving. And I appreciate you bringing all this to my attention more closely, because I hadn't considered this idea of the sorrow
Hmm.
of our common fathers. What has touched me the most in examining these, what does that mean? And to lighten the sorrow of, and it's also interesting, he says, as much as possible, meaning there are degrees to which the consciousness in different people can lighten, can glow and generate light, cast light. But anyway, I like that image of somehow in some other dimension, this common father seeing the light bulbs starting to flicker and then turn on. Just like when you plug in Christmas lights,
Mhm.
and some of them come on and some of them don't. But and what a pleasure it is when they come on. It's a weak comparison, but you get the idea.
Hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective. Yeah. Made me think also, and I can see how connected it is with the fifth striving, but made me think of, a recent interview
Yes.
I shared with you with David Hawkins, and he was saying that at some point in his evolution, when he was very lit, he was lit with the divine and free of the ego, he was saying that he would just be somewhere and he felt like something moves through him and goes out of his heart, goes somewhere. He didn't know where, but then he looked, he thought, oh, there was an accident and some people were praying. Or he would walk through Chicago, some bad neighborhood, and then again he felt like something comes through him and flows there, and the two gangs, instead of fighting, they are like, whatever, they stop fighting. Or anyway, he gave several examples of this, like he's sitting next to an old lady who was totally paranoid, schizophrenic, and he was just sitting there. He didn't try to heal her. He, as a personal self, didn't try to do anything, but he was just aware how he was used as the closest bulb, as the closest the transmitter, for that energy. That's very interesting.
There's also, that makes me think, there's also this idea in the study of cosmology that, and Gurdjieff explained it by saying, not even God himself can, I forget what it was, beat the best card in the deck. I don't remember, but the idea meaning that from if God, the so-called absolute consciousness, is many dimensions removed from the human dimension, it can't actually directly influence. The only way it can do that is through these different worlds and through these forms. And so we are a form, a manifestation through which this consciousness can manifest itself at this level. And in this way, we are like the eyes and ears and hands of God. But I mean that in the sense of consciousness, the high, ultimate, absolute, all embracing, infinite conscious awareness. And it requires, it seems, these forms to manifest through. And that's what the human being is. And if the light is on, then it can perform its function, its purpose, play its role, etc., all the more effectively, presumably. Although some light bulbs seem to perform their role very well in the dark without turning on. Corrupt people, power mongers, people who play these roles in history that actually contribute to the suffering of humanity, which again is not personal. It's part of the necessity It's part of the reality of this thing called life on Earth.
All right, Peter. So let's go. We have the final striving now. And that is very interesting and mysterious the more I sit with it. So the fifth striving. The striving always to assist the most rapid perfecting of other beings, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms, up to the degree of the sacred Martfotai, that is, up to the degree of self-individuality. I'll say it again. The striving always to assist the most rapid perfecting of other beings, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms, up to the degree of the sacred Martfotai, that is, up to the degree of self-individuality. You want to start with this, Peter?
As we were mentioning during our break, this one is so interesting. It has so many layers to it. Especially this phrase, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms. This is very interesting. And then up to the degree of self-individuality. So what that implies to me is we can't actually, no one can wake somebody else up. Nobody can actually make someone more conscious. The consciousness in the other person has to realize itself. And then from there, it can become more conscious. It can become more self-revelatory to itself. But we can support that arising, you could say, in other people. But that's maybe as far as we can take it, at least at this point, while we're still in human form. We can only help, assist, foster, reinforce, promote, encourage, and that kind of thing. And that's already huge, of course. But so that's one of the things I see from this. The other thing I'm feeling here and looking at it is, of course, it's quite a challenge always to assist the most rapid perfecting. That means never missing an opportunity, being as conscious as possible and being alert to helping, being available, that kind of thing. That's how I interpret it. But what I find interesting about this kind of relates to the fourth striving. It's not saying help relieve the suffering of other people. A lot of emphasis is often put, let's help relieve the suffering of others. But what this is saying, help reinforce the awakening, the conscious awakening of others. And that's very different. Those are kind of going in different directions. And to help to relieve the suffering and to help to foster the awakening. Granted, as you mentioned in your practice as a psychotherapist, you are often helping relieve the suffering and helping people heal. And then that in itself is a part and parcel of helping foster the awakening in them, the self-realization in them. So of course, this striving, as I also mentioned during the break, the third striving is the only one that mentions, or it's the first time the word conscious is mentioned, a conscious striving, which implies by the time you arrive at this third striving, you are conscious or approaching consciousness. And now you're in a position to work on these last three strivings in a conscious way, not in a mental way. Not as a theory, not as a point of view, not as just trying to be a good person, but from the perspective of consciousness, which is very different. We're now talking another dimension. Is at play here, is involved, is an influence. Now there's an influence coming from consciousness itself with regard to these. So in simple terms, I see, Mihai, before I turn it over to you, I see it's pretty obvious on a simple level, help others awaken to the fullest extent that you can. Help them reach the fullest extent of awakening they can at this level. To me, that's kind of the summary, simplified summary of my take on it. And then I think I think you could spend a long time just sitting with this fifth striving, with all of them really, but the fifth one, a long time and pondering it and letting it. And I think so what happened to me is new aspects of it started to kind of reveal themselves in my thoughts. And this is quite, knowing Gurdjieff, of course, even though this book, Beelzebub's Tale, it can seem like a lot of blather at times. And he writes sentences that are 2 paragraphs long, and he invents words, and he's wandering, and he has these long thoughts, and it's challenging to stay with him. And so there's a lot there, but at the same time, it's all very carefully composed, and the words are chosen. And it's also interesting, he didn't write this in English, as I understand it. He had help from Orage and some other people to put it in its final shape where it was comprehensible. And but he wanted it to be veiled. He wanted this language to, he wanted it to veil the underlying esoteric truth. And you could say it's sort of a veiled rendition of the fourth way system, but it's that and more, I believe. And so this, again, just to say, here we have one long sentence, which he was very fond of. He'd pack a lot of ideas into one sentence. He wouldn't, as a good writer, break them into smaller sentences for the benefit of the reader. But worth pondering, and quite beautiful the more you look at them.
Yeah, also from one angle, these 5 strivings is one of the most clearest and short sentences from the book, and they really go
Yes.
1 page or 2 pages long, and I sat with it quite some time, but I'm surprised just having a talk on this with you, how it unpacks more and more. It's so,
I've been surprised too.
yeah, yeah. And this, I remember the story from, I mean, yeah, that as he was writing this towards the end of his life, because he felt like he doesn't have much time left, and it will be more efficient to put all his teaching into a form of a book. And the idea was that he stopped groups, he stopped seeing almost anybody for a long time, and he'll just have very few people, like 6 years or so. Very few people will just come there, and even they will say, "Hey, come here, just sit here," or "Come here," and yeah, it was very interesting. And then I think at some point he started doing some groups again, and then he will have people read these chapters, and he will ask them. He will read this chapter and he will ask them, or in the early stages of the book, when it wasn't before it was published, you ask him, what did you understand? And the students will say what they understood. And Gurdjieff was like, okay, let me bury this bone a little deeper. So he really wanted to, then he make it more veiled, in some way, which is so different than what's happening today on the internet. It's like everything, the ultimate, all the sages and everything is put out there, and a lot of explanation. And from one angle, what I am doing, I mean, I'm like breaking it down, explaining it, and hundreds of videos, and sometimes I'm like, man, it's like as if and I started to feel a little trying the need to, hey, let's make it less so as if I'm giving half-chewed strawberries in people's mouth. Like, and I think it's I know you wanted people to take more self-responsibility for this, to be more active on their own rather than be spoon-fed.
Well, and too, before we even started these conversations on the internet like this, in YouTube, posting all this, putting it all out there, I was very reluctant because of course I came from the tradition of a school is a closed circle. And these ideas are not meant for everyone, just as these 5 strivings imply. You have to have a foundation and you have to build something on top of that. And then you have to add something on top of that in order to be able to do some more of these things. And it's it's not it's not that you just throw it out there, because that's what's happening now. Everything's being thrown out there. And that's why I felt, well, maybe it's time. I gave it a lot of consideration, and I was quite hesitant. And I'm still not fully understanding why this is happening, why so much knowledge of really all of history, this this degree and this quantity of esoteric knowledge is being released into the world. It's a very big moment. It's powerful, and yes, and so he didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted people to work. Only if you had already met a couple of these strivings, for example, were you ready to dig? Like he said, a conscious striving to learn more about world creation and world maintenance. And in a way, his book is about that. And you have to dig through this book to get the nuggets. And it's the same with the Bible. You have to dig. The nuggets are there. The whole thing is not it. There's a lot hidden inside other things
Mm-hmm.
that have an esoteric truth behind them. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting how Gurdjieff did it back in the 1940s,
Mm-hmm.
or whenever it was he was writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, let me look at this and take a stab at it, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So this, yeah, striving always to assist the most rapid perfecting of other beings, both of those similar to oneself and those of other forms, up to the degree of sacred Martfotai, that is, to the degree of self-individuality. So yeah, I totally agree with you that it is about once one, and that's important, once one has accumulated something in oneself, once one has navigated the territory of being more conscious, then to help others, to guide them on the territory, yeah, help them to be more conscious. But here it's tricky because they could be one can be unconscious and trying to help others, and
Say that again. One can be
one can be pretty one
unconscious.
can be pretty unconscious, and
Mm-hmm.
one can be trying to help others for wrong reasons, to
Mm-hmm.
so the ego is trying to get juice from being a healer, or trying to be special as a teacher, or trying to so it can be done from very wrong reasons, and there will be total spiritual sleep. So it's important to be honest with oneself. And also, as I work even in healing work, I know that, and people, even therapists or practitioners, come to me, and I train them. I tell them, hey man, the most important factor for you to become a better practitioner is for you to do the work, for you to face these skeletons, and for you to dissolve them, and to face these demons and battle with them until they dissolve. And that is going to be what will make you a good therapist, not the degree, not the technique, not what I'm saying here. So the same applies to awakening. So that's important. Another piece here is that one needs to be discerning to see if people are interested. So as we used to call in the system, the fourth way, so to become a third force for other people, meaning that they need to want to. So they need to want to they are hungry for higher knowledge, they are hungry for guidance, they are more ready. And so that will be their first force in them, their inner striving towards awakening or truth or something. the second force is their own, the denying force, the inertia, the sleep, the mechanical habits, a whole lifetime of living unconsciously, laziness, and all of that. And then we can be a third force to kind of, provide them the right information or the right conditions, like a group or a guidance or a friendship for people who are interested. But it's very important to not, as Master Jesus would say, don't throw pearls to swine, because they will trample under their feet. They will bite you. And this is a tricky part, especially at the beginning of the path. I did it myself when I discovered this, and I was trying to share with everybody and convert my mother and and everything, and my father and my girlfriend, and they were all looking at me strange, and it was just mechanical, unnecessary talking, sharing my enthusiasm. So now I let people be. I don't interfere unless they are really coming to me. And even when they come to me, I'm discerning, why are they coming to me? Because there is healing, and then there is awakening. And there is overlap in them. And on the awakening path, there needs to be healing. There needs to be some healing, because, the energy can be all scrunched up, and there's so much pain and trauma and stuff like that one may need to clean up and, put like a little surgery and some balm to get a little.
There needs to be destruction also.
Yeah. So I am seeing where they are at and what is it that they want, and I honor that and I respect that, and I'm trying to support their evolution. Sometimes their evolution, they need to heal, they need to do some stuff, and I just support them, nudge them, and then maybe after their healing, there will be seeds of even with my therapy clients, I give them homework for almost all of them. Dude, I want you to read The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, because basically, yeah, there's this idea of, I realize that it doesn't quite work like this. Hey, I want to alleviate your suffering, and I'm doing some method or something, and you have some relief. I realize that doesn't work. It works for the moment. It works for a little bit, but then they go back to the same thing. They do the same thing over and over. And I realize what's really necessary is that what will be most helpful is to help them become more conscious, help them be more aware. One cannot diminish suffering if one remains asleep and mechanical. Yeah. So let's get back on track here. This reminds me, I have two, I mentioned to you, Peter, I have two, one of these almost small quotations that you put on the wall on a canvas from a Tibetan tradition from Dalai Lama. And both of them are very interesting. They are connected to the strivings. And I remember Gurdjieff had a lot of respect, at least 1930, before the Tibet was taken over, but he was saying that due to the isolation and all of that, there remained a lot of esoteric knowledge and esoteric masters there, when in the rest of the world they kind of disappeared. But I think things change now with the Chinese and everything. But the two quotes I had in mind was one saying, Dalai Lama was saying something like, hey, we are visitors here on this planet, and we are here for 80, 90, maximum 100 years to the very most. Try to do something useful, something good with our life, with your life. And if you contribute to other people's happiness, you are going to find the true meaning of life. So, and I realized, to contribute to people's happiness, it's the only way to find some real happiness is to become more conscious and to do the internal work. So this is connected somehow to the fifth striving. And the other quote I have from Dalai Lama outside of my house, even I put it on outside, said something like, as you wake up in the morning, remind yourself to, I don't have the exact quotes, but to focus your full energy. And this is a precious life I have, and this is a precious day, and I want to focus my whole energy to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. So that's kind of the first strive. I mean, it's the third striving, I believe, in there. So I feel like there is something around that. Also, this idea of becoming more conscious. Initially, we do it for ourselves. Somehow, the ego is interested to get it, to attain it, is curious, but ultimately, as David Hawkins was talking about, this is it's not for oneself, because that oneself anyway, the personal self doesn't exist. It's almost like the divine consciousness, the universal consciousness, as you mentioned before the break with the bulbs. The consciousness, the divine consciousness activates, becomes self-conscious in various bulbs. And David Hawkins was saying that many people want to, hey, I want to change the world and I want to fight and activism and fight this and do that and help people. And so this is very hard. And he says, please don't do that. Stay home and just do your evolutionary work. And then what you are becoming, your higher level of being, what you are becoming is going to raise the overall level of consciousness of humanity. Just by being, he was saying that there are people not doing anything special, not even having students maybe, but just somewhere in a cave or somewhere having a simple life, and just their level of being is emanating and lifting somehow the whole level of the ocean. So he was saying, don't try to bring every boat up, lift the boat, lift the ship, but try to do your work, and thus the level of the water raises.
That's beautiful. Yes. Also, we can't help others until we've been of use to, we can't be of use to others until we are of use to ourselves. And that's why these first two strivings, they're really about that. And then the third is talking about world creation and world maintenance, and how, you mentioned trying to change the world. Well, the more you study the laws of the universe, as best as we can understand them in the form that they've been presented to us through all the various teachings, the more you see things are going a certain way, and they're meant to go the way they're going often, despite what we might imagine how much they could be improved. So this whole idea of change and improvement is not what we imagine just with the mind alone and our emotions and our instinctive desires and all these things. Things are very big, and but we can be of use to others' consciousness of these things. It's curious. You could almost go so far as to say, the perception just came to me, that this sort of eager desire to change the world and change others is it's really a reflection of the extent to which our being wants to change, but it's being turned outward rather than turning inward. And it's there, that energy is correct, but it's going in the wrong direction. And if everyone turned inward, the world would change outwardly. It would have no choice but to change. But see, that's has to do with these three forces. When we try to actively go out and force the world to change and force other people to change, it's not a successful, what's called a triad, these three forces. And it inevitably creates its opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Despite best intentions, it inevitably creates its opposite. And this is part of understanding world creation
Mm-hmm.
and world maintenance.
It's interesting. I was just talking to someone in my group who, you know, I mean, what's happening now in America and everywhere else, it's really, at some human level, very alarming and disturbing. And if one goes down that rabbit hole, there's be like, you can have no peace and you are freaking out. And then you're going to try to do something coming from a good place of care and love. But so this person was telling me that, you know, I'm kind of like an activism, and so I'm like getting involved and like messaging and doing and whistleblowing and all that. And so I was saying that, hey, you know, be careful with that, because basically if one comes from freaking out, if I am trying to be a activism and help people and raise awareness out of the energy of freaking out of very scared, out of rage, out of
Out
like,
of identification.
yes, out of identification, this is very weak. There's not enough power there. That doesn't have much power. And actually, I'm going to be met with opposition, and I'm going to be drained, and I'm going to go down, you know. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a great example of this. Actually, he even had a book called How to Fight, because he was an activism, but he was teaching this like, hey, you need to be at peace. You need to be very conscious, and then, you know, so then you do what you need to do, but you can't come from rage and identification and fear. So he was very peaceful, nourished, open-hearted, grounded, not freaking out, and choosing to take some action, to do some marches, to talk about this, talk about that. But he wasn't frazzled in the process, you know? So that is possible. But Peter, let's stop it here, and yeah, maybe it
Okay.
inspires some people to read,
Yes.
especially people from my group, or to
And
read.
to ponder these 5 things, this isn't just a cursory list. There's a lot behind them. I had never really looked at them in depth until you asked, would I like to have this conversation with you? And I will keep this, and I will spend some more time with it. And it's very valuable, very rich, very deep. Because he dug the bone, he buried the bone very deep, and
Yeah,
it's worth digging here to see what he was trying to convey. These are not simple, ordinary statements. This is kind of extraordinary, really, what he put into words here.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for including me. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot, and it's given me some new insights. Very valuable, yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I will put here the strivings, you know, as a text, so you have it. Yeah, put it here, and they are all on the internet. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.